Imagine being a 15-year-old kid, just walking into a store to buy a gift for your mom, when suddenly flashing police lights blind your eyes and a cop grabs your arm, accusing you of theft. The whole store stares. You try to speak, but no one listens. And the reason? Your skin color. But what this racist cop didn't know was that the boy he humiliated wasn't just any kid. His father was a high-ranking FBI official. What happens next turns the entire city upside down. From humiliation to justice. From silence to a nationwide wake-up call. This is a story of how one young black boy turned pain into power and taught the system a lesson it would never forget. Welcome to Brainfuel, where real stories spark emotion, ignite awareness, and remind you of the power of truth. Every video here isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call. So buckle up, because today you're about to witness justice in its rawest form. Hands where I can see them. Those 5 words hit the air like a thunderclap. The command was sharp, cold, and heavy with accusation. People on the sidewalk froze. Heads turned. A few stepped back, instinctively reaching for their phones. And right there, caught in the flashing glare of blue and red lights, stood 15-year-old Jamal Carter, a tall, lanky kid with big brown eyes and a quiet smile. Jamal wasn't used to this kind of attention. He just left Sound Zone Electronics, clutching a small white bag, a new pair of noise-canceling headphones he had been saving up for months to buy. It was his birthday. He'd mowed lawns all summer, babysat his little cousins, and even sold some of his old sneakers online. He wanted this one thing, a gift to himself for turning 15. But before he could even take 10 steps out of the store, a harsh voice shattered the moment. "Hey, you! Stop right there." Jamal turned confused. A police officer, white, mid-40s, solid build, was marching toward with a hand on his gun holster. The man's expression wasn't one of curiosity. It was accusation, carved deep into his face. Me?" Jamal asked, blinking. "Don't play dumb, kid," the officer barked. "I saw you run out of that store. Thought you could just grab something and walk off." Jamal froze. His first instinct was to laugh, because this had to be some kind of mistake. But then he saw the officer's face, the tight jaw, the narrowed eyes. This wasn't a joke. "Sir, I didn't steal anything," Jamal said quickly, holding up the bag. "I paid for this. I have the receipt." But the cop wasn't listening. He took another step closer, voice rising. "I said, drop the bag, hands where I can see them." The sound of the gun being unsnapped from its holster made Jamal's stomach twist. He raised his hands, the bag dangling from his wrist. People had started gathering now. 2 college kids on scooters stopped nearby, whispering. A woman across the street had her phone out, recording. Jamal could feel every eye on him, judging him, labeling him, not as a boy with a birthday gift, but as a suspect. "Sir," Jamal said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady, "I paid for these. The store has cameras. You can check." "Quiet," the officer snapped. "You think I haven't heard that before? You all got the same story." Jamal's heart pounded. He didn't know whether to cry, run, or stand still. He thought about his dad, how he always said, "If you ever get stopped by police, stay calm, stay respectful." So that's what he did. He stayed calm. He stayed respectful. But the officer didn't stop. He snatched the shopping bag out of Jamal's hand and tore it open, spilling the box onto the sidewalk. Then, without asking, he yanked Jamal's backpack off his shoulder and threw it against the curb. "Let's see what else you've got in here," the cop muttered. Jamal wanted to shout, wanted to tell him to stop, but fear had his voice locked in his throat. "Sir, please." "Turn around," the cop barked. He spun Jamal roughly by the shoulder and slammed him against the hood of the police car. The cold metal burned through his thin T-shirt. "I said I didn't do anything." Jamal cried. The cop leaned in, sneering. "You think I don't know your type? Always acting innocent. Always playing the victim." The words stung. But worse than that, they broke something inside Jamal, because he could see it in the officer's eyes. This wasn't about theft. It wasn't about the store. It was about him, about the color of his skin. "Officer Daniels," a voice called from the crowd. "He's just a kid." Daniels ignored it. He grabbed Jamal's wrists and snapped handcuffs around them. Click, click. The sound echoed through the street like a verdict. A few people gasped. Someone yelled, "Check the receipt, man." Daniels turned toward the store, shouting, "Manager, you said a kid ran out with something, right?" The store manager, a short, nervous man, stepped out and looked around. He spotted Jamal, then frowned. No, sir," he said carefully. He paid. I remember him. He used his debit card." But Daniels wasn't listening anymore. He was too deep in his story, too deep in his certainty. He wanted to be right. He needed to be right. Jamal's face burned with shame as strangers watched. Some looked angry, others helpless. A few just shook their heads. One woman, holding a toddler's hand, whispered, "This is why I teach my son to be careful." And Jamal heard her, every word. Tears welled in his eyes. "I didn't do anything," he whispered again, this time more to himself than anyone else. Daniels yanked him upright. "Save it. You can explain it downtown." Then something buzzed in Jamal's pocket, his phone vibrating. Daniels reached in and snatched it out. "Were you calling, huh? Trying to get your buddies here to help you out?" Jamal shook his head, desperate. "No, it's just my dad." Daniels rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure it is." But then the phone screen lit up, and the name on it stopped everything. In bold white letters, it read, "Dad, FBI." Daniels squinted. What is this?" Jamal swallowed hard. "That's my father, Marcus Carter. He works for the FBI." Daniel's smirk returned, but this time it was weaker. "Nice try, kid. You think dropping some fake name is going to scare me?" But before he could toss the phone aside, a deep, commanding voice came through the speaker. "Officer, this is Special Agent Marcus Carter, Assistant Director of the FBI. You have my son in custody, and I suggest you release him right now." The entire sidewalk went silent. Even the hum of passing traffic seemed to fade. Daniels froze, phone still in his hand. The color drained from his face. This is a misunderstanding, sir," he stammered. But the voice on the other end was ice cold. "No, it's not a misunderstanding," Agent Carter said. "It's racial profiling. And you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The crowd gasped. Jamal stared at the phone, tears streaming down his face. But now they weren't tears of fear. They were relief, because finally someone believed him. And for the first time since those flashing lights appeared, Jamal realized the truth. This fight wasn't just his anymore. It was much, much bigger. The metal cuffs bit into Jamal's wrists. Cold, tight, final. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears, faster than the sirens that still flashed behind him. The world had become a blur. Flashing lights, murmuring voices, and a wave of shame that felt heavier than the cuffs themselves. "Move," Officer Daniels snapped, shoving him toward the patrol car. Jamal stumbled, barely keeping his balance. He could smell the bitter mix of exhaust and hot pavement. His mouth was dry. The words, "You're under arrest for theft," were still echoing in his head, even though he hadn't stolen anything. A crowd had gathered now, maybe 15, 20 people. Phones were raised high. A few whispered things he couldn't quite hear. Others just stared, frozen between disbelief and disgust. To them, it was another episode of a story they'd seen too many times before. A young black boy, hands behind his back. A white cop convinced of guilt before proof. The story wrote itself, until the truth refused to stay quiet. But at that moment, Jamal didn't feel like a symbol. He just felt small. "Please, sir," he said again, voice trembling. "You've got it wrong. I didn't steal anything. I paid." Daniels cut him off sharply. "Enough. You're only making it worse for yourself." He pushed Jamal's head down and opened the back door of the police car. Jamal could see his reflection in the tinted glass, his brown skin glistening with sweat, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. The officer looked around, scanning the crowd like he was proud of what he'd done. "Let this be a lesson," he said under his breath. "Think twice before pulling something like this again." Jamal's chest tightened. A lesson? What lesson was this supposed to teach? That he couldn't walk into a store without being seen as a suspect? That the color of his skin was enough to make him guilty? A woman's voice broke through the noise. "Officer, I saw him pay. He didn't steal anything." Daniels turned, his expression hard. "Ma'am, stay back. You're obstructing an investigation." The woman shook her head, holding up her phone. "No, I've got it all recorded." "You're wrong." A few others began to murmur, emboldened by her words. Someone shouted, "Check the cameras, man." Another yelled, "You're profiling him." For the first time, doubt flickered across Daniel's face. A brief moment of unease, quickly buried under arrogance. He grabbed Jamal's arm and hissed, "You think your little audience is going to save you? You kids always act like you're victims." "Well, not today." Jamal wanted to scream, wanted to tell him about the hours he'd worked, the pride he'd felt buying something with his own money. But his voice just wouldn't come. His throat felt tight, his chest heavy. Every second felt like an eternity. Inside the car, the air was suffocating. The faint smell of leather and old coffee filled his nose. Through the glass, he could see his backpack still lying on the ground, torn open, papers and notebooks scattered everywhere. One page fluttered in the wind. A school essay titled, "What Justice Means to Me." Irony had never felt so cruel. Outside, Daniel spoke into his radio, his tone casual. "Dispatch. This is Officer Daniels. Suspect in custody. Bringing him in for questioning." Questioning? For what? For existing? Jamal rested his head against the window, trying not to cry. But the more he tried to stay strong, the harder it became. He could feel everyone's eyes on him. Some pitied him. Others looked away, because looking meant feeling something they didn't want to feel. He remembered his dad's words again. If something like this ever happens, stay calm. Keep your hands visible and don't argue. He'd followed every rule. And still, this. A tear rolled down his cheek, hot against his skin. Daniels opened the driver's door and slid in, still muttering under his breath. "Kids like you think you can play the system. Not on my watch." Jamal couldn't take it anymore. "Why are you doing this to me?" he whispered. "I didn't do anything." Daniels didn't even look back. Save it for your lawyer. But before he could start the car, a sharp knock hit the window. The store manager. He looked nervous, glancing between Jamal and the officer. Officer Daniels? I think there's been a misunderstanding." Daniels frowned. "What are you talking about?" The manager held up a printed receipt. "The boy he paid. I just checked the register. Car transaction at 2:17 p.m. Headphones purchase. No issues." Daniels' jaw tightened. "You sure?" "Yes, absolutely. The cameras show it too." For a split second, the whole world went silent inside that car. Jamal lifted his head, hope flickering behind his tears. But Daniels didn't look at him. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge the truth. Instead, he waved the manager off. "I'll handle it." He stepped out, dragging Jamal with him again. "Looks like we need to clear a few things up," he muttered, pretending it was all part of the process. The crowd buzzed louder now. People were recording every second, some shouting for him to let the boy go. Jamal's face burned with humiliation. He could feel the judgment of strangers searing into him. The whispers, the pity, the outrage. Every part of him wanted to disappear. And then something deep inside snapped, not with anger, but with resolve. He lifted his chin and said quietly, "You're wrong, sir, and you'll see it." Daniels glared at him. "Is that a threat?" "No," Jamal said softly, eyes locked on the officer. "It's a promise." Daniels scoffed, shoving him toward the hood again. "You kids never learn." The crowd booed. Someone yelled, "Let him go, man." Another shouted, "You're going to lose your job for this." Daniels ignored them all, but his hands were trembling now. Deep down, he could feel control slipping away, not just of the situation, but of the narrative he thought he owned. And then Jamal's phone, still in the officer's pocket, started ringing again. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Daniels frowned, pulling it out. The screen lit up with the same name that had shaken him before. Dad, FBI. The crowd fell silent again. Cameras zoomed in. Daniels stared at the phone, like it was a live grenade. His pulse quickened. He hesitated. For the first time since this all began, when he finally answered, a deep voice filled the air. "Officer Daniels." It said calmly, "This is Special Agent Marcus Carter, the FBI. You are detaining my son, Jamal Carter, without cause. I suggest you release him immediately." The officer's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The crowd erupted. Gasps, murmurs, whispers of FBI. "That's his dad." Daniel swallowed hard, sweat forming on his forehead. Sir, I was just—" The voice interrupted, calm and cold. "You were just what, officer? Profiling? Harassing? Humiliating?" Every word landed like a hammer, and for the first time all day, Jamal saw something new in Daniel's eyes. Fear, real fear, because the boy he had treated like a criminal, the one he had humiliated in front of everyone, wasn't just anyone. He was the son of one of the highest-ranking FBI officials in the state. And this officer had just crossed the wrong line, with the wrong kid, on the wrong day. The air went still. Officer Daniels froze. Phone still pressed his ear, as the deep, commanding voice on the other end repeated itself, calm, sharp, and full of authority. "This is Special Agent Marcus Carter, Assistant Director of the FBI. You're detaining my son, Jamal Carter, without cause. I suggest you release him immediately." For a moment, the street fell silent. Even the crowd, which had been shouting seconds ago, stopped to listen. Daniels blinked, his confidence faltering. He looked at Jamal, then at the phone screen again, as if hoping it was some kind of prank. "FBI," he muttered under his breath. "You think I'm stupid, kid?" He hit the speaker button, and that's when everyone heard it. "You're making a very big mistake, Officer Daniels," the voice said, clear and controlled. "Now put my son on the phone." Daniels swallowed, trying to recover his composure. "Sir, this is Officer Daniels of the Metro Police Department. The suspect—" "He's not a suspect," Marcus interrupted, his tone dropping lower, sharper. "He's a minor, and you just unlawfully detained him in public, without evidence and on camera. I suggest you listen very carefully to what I say next." The officer's face turned red. He stepped away from the car, turning his back to the crowd to hide his panic. "Sir, look, maybe there's been a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a nervous laugh. "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," Marcus said. "There's a felony. You handcuffed my son in front of witnesses, accused him of a crime without probable cause, and now you're obstructing the situation further. Are your body cams on, officer?" Daniels stuttered. Yes, sir. They're on." "Good," Marcus said. "Then they'll capture your apology when you let my son go. And if they mysteriously malfunction, my legal team will see you in court by morning." The officer's hand shook as he held the phone. The weight of what he'd done started to sink in. Behind him, a murmur ran through the crowd. People exchanged looks, half in shock, half in satisfaction. Someone whispered, "That cop just got caught big time." Jamal, still sitting in the back of the patrol car, could barely believe what he was hearing. His father's voice was steady, powerful, the same voice that had always sounded calm no matter chaos around him. But today, there was something new in it, a quiet, burning anger. Daniels hesitated, looking from the crowd to the car, then back at the phone. "Sir, I'll need to confirm your identity before." "Check your database," Marcus snapped. "Assistant Director Marcus Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I oversee the Behavioral Analysis Unit in Washington. You have exactly 15 minutes before my team arrives." Daniels blinked. Your team?" "Oh, they're already en route," Marcus said coldly. "You detained the wrong child, Officer Daniels. And now you're about to answer for it." Click. The line went dead. For a few seconds, everything was quiet again, except for the faint hum of the patrol car's engine. Jamal looked out the window, his heart pounding. He could see the officer's hand trembling as he tried to compose himself. Daniels exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. Then he turned toward Jamal, trying to put on a fake smile. "All right, listen, kid, maybe we got off on the wrong foot." Jamal just stared back, silent. You said your dad works for the FBI, huh?" Daniels asked, voice forced and awkward. You could have told me that earlier might have saved us both some trouble. Jamal's eyes hardened. I did tell you, he said quietly. You just didn't listen. Daniels clenched his jaw, turning away again. He could feel every camera phone pointed at him. The weight of public humiliation was starting to crush his ego. And then, from the distance, came the low hum of engines. 2 black SUVs appeared at the far end of the street, moving fast. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising again. The vehicles came to a stop beside the police cruiser, doors opening in perfect synchronization. 4 men in black suits stepped out, their movements sharp and deliberate. The badges clipped to their belts gleamed in the sunlight. Then, from the back seat of the second SUV, he stepped out. Marcus Carter. Tall, calm, dressed in a dark suit that looked more like armor than fabric. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those eyes carried the kind of authority that made people stand straighter without realizing it. The crowd parted like water around him. Even those who didn't know who he was could feel it. The presence of someone who wasn't just important, but powerful. He stopped a few feet from Officer Daniels and looked at his son, still handcuffed, still standing by the car, still humiliated. Marcus's jaw tightened. Uncuff him. Daniels froze. Sir, Marcus took one slow step forward. I said uncuff him. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of authority that left no room for debate. Daniels fumbled with his keys, the metallic clink of the cuffs echoing as they opened. Jamal rubbed his wrists red and sore, but didn't say a word. Marcus stepped closer to his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. You okay, son? Jamal nodded weakly. Yeah, Dad. Marcus exhaled, eyes softening for a brief moment, then hardened again as he turned back to the officer. Officer Daniels, he said slowly, you accuse my son of theft. Do you have any proof of that claim? Daniels shifted nervously. Sir, I receive a report. From whom? Marcus cut in. The store manager, who was still standing nearby, quickly shook his head. No, sir, I didn't call anyone. He paid in full. Marcus raised an eyebrow. So there was no report, which means this wasn't about suspicion. This was about assumption. Daniel stuttered. It was a misunderstanding, sir. I thought... Marcus interrupted again, stepping closer. No, officer, you didn't think. You reacted, you profiled, and you humiliated a child in public without cause. Every word hit like a hammer. The crowd murmured in agreement. Some even applauded quietly. Phones were still recording, capturing every moment, every expression, every piece of evidence. Daniel swallowed hard, trying to hold his composure. Sir, with all due respect. Marcus' voice dropped to a chilling calm. Respect is earned. You've shown none. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Marcus turned toward his team. Agents, note the time and incident. Full report to Internal Affairs and the Chief's office within the hour. I want the dash cam and body cam footage secured immediately. Daniel's mouth went dry. That won't be necessary, sir. Marcus met his eyes. You don't get to decide what's necessary anymore. Jamal watched it all, standing quietly beside his father. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt safe, but not because the danger was gone, because the truth had finally arrived. Daniels lowered his gaze, mumbling, it was just a mistake. Marcus's voice was steady. No, officer, it was a choice. The crowd erupted, some clapping, others cheering softly. Phones kept recording, ensuring the world would soon see what had happened. Jamal looked up at his father, whispering, You really came. Marcus smiled faintly, placing his hand on Jamal's shoulder again. Always. And as the officer stood frozen in shame, the father and son walked away, leaving behind flashing lights, broken pride, and the first sparks of accountability. The street had never felt so quiet. Not because the noise stopped. People were still whispering. Phones were still recording. The city still hummed around them. But because Marcus Carter's presence silenced everything that mattered. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, radiating the kind of calm that made even chaos hesitate. His black SUV gleamed under the afternoon sun, the FBI insignia faint but visible on the license plate. The men who stepped out behind him, clean suits, earpieces glinting, didn't have to say a word. Their posture said it all. This man wasn't just someone important. He was the authority you didn't cross. Officer Daniels, who had moments ago been barking orders like a wolf in control, suddenly looked like a deer caught in headlights. His confidence evaporated. The arrogance that had colored every one of his words just minutes earlier dissolved into uncertainty. Marcus's eyes swept over the scene, his son standing by the patrol car, wrists red from the cuffs. The crowd still gathered, half in outrage, half in awe. The open backpack lying in the gutter, its contents scattered like debris from a crash. His voice broke the silence. Low, controlled, and razor-sharp. "Officer Daniels," he said, "you detained my son for theft. Do you have proof?" The officer blinked. His mouth opened, then closed again. Sweat had begun to gather along his temple. "Sir, I received a report of a possible shoplifting. I was just doing my job." Marcus didn't blink. "A report?" he repeated. "From whom?" Daniels turned slightly, gesturing weakly toward the store. "The store manager said." But before he could finish, the manager himself stepped forward, his voice trembling. "No, sir, that's not true. I didn't call anyone. I told him the boy paid. I even showed the receipt." A ripple went through the crowd. People started murmuring again. Phones tilted higher, catching every word, every reaction. Marcus took a single step closer, his tone dropping an octave. "So, you knew my son paid, and you still cuffed him?" Daniel stammered. "It was just a misunderstanding, sir." "No," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but slicing through the air like glass. "A misunderstanding is when you get someone's name wrong. What you did was humiliation. You profiled a child. You dragged him through the street like a criminal in front of dozens of witnesses, all while ignoring the evidence right in front of you." Each word hit Daniels harder than the last. His chest rose and fell quickly. He glanced around, desperate for support, but the other officers who had arrived were quiet, watching, not daring to interrupt. Marcus turned to his son. "Jamal, show me your wrists." Jamal lifted them slowly. The red marks where the cuffs had bitten into his skin were still fresh, angry. The sight made Marcus's jaw tighten. He faced Daniels again. "Did you at least read him his rights before you cuffed him?" Daniels hesitated. He wasn't under arrest yet. Marcus stepped closer. Then why was he in handcuffs? The officer swallowed hard. "For safety reasons." "Whose safety?" Marcus snapped. "Yours?" From a 15-year-old boy with a shopping bag and a receipt. The crowd murmured louder. Someone shouted, "Tell him." Another said, "That boy didn't deserve this." Daniels looked down, face red with shame, but Marcus wasn't finished. "You see, officer," Marcus said, his voice calmer now, almost measured, "I work with law enforcement every single day. I train them. I know what it looks like when someone makes an honest mistake, and I know what it looks like when bias controls the badge." He paused, locking eyes with the trembling man before him. And today, bias was in control. Daniels opened his mouth to defend himself, but Marcus raised a hand. "Don't. Not another word. Every second of this has been recorded, by your body cam, by these witnesses, and by the countless phones pointed at you right now. You're not going to talk your way out of this. The only thing left for you to decide is whether you walk away in shame or in cuffs." The words landed like thunder. The crowd broke into low cheers and gasps. Someone shouted, "Justice." Another said, "Finally, someone holding him accountable." Daniels took a shaky breath. "Sir, please. I didn't mean—" Marcus cut him off, stepping closer until they were nearly face to face. "Intent doesn't erase impact. You didn't mean to? Tell that to the kid who just spent 30 minutes thinking he was going to jail for something he didn't do. Tell that to the parents who will now warn their children, again, that even when you're innocent, your skin color can make you guilty." Daniels looked away. His lips quivered, but no sound came. Marcus's team stood silently behind him, watching, ready, professional. They didn't need orders. They'd seen this kind of moment before. A man trying to hold power over someone who finally had someone stronger to stand up for them. Jamal stood beside his father now, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt the ground steady beneath his feet. "Dad," he whispered, "can we just go home?" Marcus turned to him, eyes softening for a brief second. "We will, son. But first, the truth needs to be written, not just said." He looked back at Daniels. "You'll file an official statement. You'll include every detail, the stop, the search, the lack of evidence. And then you'll sign an apology report acknowledging misconduct." Daniel's mouth dropped open. "Sir, that's career suicide." Marcus's stare didn't waver. "No, officer, that's accountability." The crowd erupted in applause now. Small at first, then growing louder, a wave of approval and vindication. Marcus turned slightly to one of his agents. "Get internal affairs on the line. I want them here within the hour." The agent nodded, pulling out his phone immediately. Daniels looked around helplessly. The authority he'd once wielded like a weapon was gone, stripped away by the very law he claimed to protect. For the first time in his career, he felt powerless. Marcus leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Let me give you some advice. Officer, power without empathy is corruption, and a badge without humility is just a piece of metal." Daniel said nothing. His hands trembled. His eyes, once sharp and accusatory, now glistened with regret or maybe fear. Marcus turned back to his son. "Let's go." The crowd parted as a father and son walked side by side. Jamal held his head high, not in arrogance, but in quiet strength. The whispers around him weren't words of judgment anymore. They were words of respect. As they reached the black SUV, Jamal looked back one last time. Officer Daniels stood alone beside his patrol car, surrounded by his own silence. In that single image, a uniformed man humbled by his own mistakes, there was a lesson louder than any speech. Justice doesn't always come in flashing lights. Sometimes it arrives in a dark suit and calm voice, and it changes everything. Marcus Carter could have left. He could have driven away with his son, filed a report, and let the system do its job. But something inside him, that fire that had guided him through years in the Bureau, refused to walk away just yet. Because this wasn't only about Jamal anymore. It was about every kid who looked like Jamal, every father who never got the chance to arrive in time, every injustice swept under the rug, because nobody with power had the courage to stand and say, "Enough!" Marcus stopped halfway to the car and turned back. The crowd was still there, phones up, faces tense, hearts pounding. The energy was electric, like everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. He raised his hand slightly and said, "Everyone, please stay where you are." Even the officers froze. Marcus nodded toward one of his agents, who handed him a slim black tablet. Within seconds, Marcus tapped the screen and connected it to the patrol car's body cam system. The footage began playing on the small monitor mounted to the car, visible to everyone nearby. And there it was, the truth. The video showed Jamal inside the store, smiling, polite, handing over cash to the cashier. The cashier gave him a bag and a receipt. Nothing suspicious. No hesitation. A completely normal transaction. Then the video cut to the moment outside. Officer Daniels approaching him aggressively, grabbing the bag from his hand, demanding ID, ignoring his protests. The manager could be heard in the background saying, "He paid, officer." The video continued. The moment Daniels handcuffed Jamal, the crowd reacting. The humiliation captured from every angle. When the clip ended, a wave of silence swept through the crowd. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then came the whispers. "He didn't do anything. He really paid." That cop lied. Marcus folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "Officer Daniels," he said slowly, "care to explain what I just showed everyone?" Daniels' face was pale. He stuttered, I must have misunderstood the situation, sir. I thought—" "No," Marcus said firmly. "You didn't think. You assumed, and that assumption almost destroyed a child's innocence. The crowd murmured louder now, a growing storm of outrage. Marcus turned to bystanders, his voice rising just enough for everyone to hear. "This," he said, gesturing to the screen, "is what happens when prejudice replaces judgment. This is why we demand accountability. Not because we hate the police, but because we need them to remember who they serve." A woman from the crowd shouted, "Tell him, Agent." Another man yelled, "That boy deserves an apology." Marcus looked back at Daniels, whose hands now trembled by his sides. "You owe my son and this community the truth." Daniels hesitated. "Sir, I—" "Say it," Marcus pressed. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command. Daniels swallowed hard, then finally looked at Jamal. I made a mistake," he began, voice shaking. "I profiled you. I saw your skin, your hoodie, your bag, and I assumed you stole something. I didn't check properly. I didn't listen. I was wrong." The crowd gasped. Some recorded closer. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Marcus took a step closer. And Daniels took a deep breath, shame flooding his voice. "And I'm sorry." Jamal looked at the man for a long moment. His eyes were tired, not from fear anymore, but from the kind of exhaustion that only comes from being judged again and again for something you can't change. He nodded slowly. "It's not just me you should be sorry to," he said quietly. "It's every kid you've ever stopped like that." Those words hit harder than any punishment could. Marcus put a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's enough, son. You've said what needed to be said." He turned back to Daniels and spoke with the calm precision of an agent who had seen it all. "Officer Daniels, you'll file a full incident report. Every detail, unedited. My office will follow up directly with your department's Internal Affairs Division. You'll also be required to undergo bias training and disciplinary review. Understand?" Daniels nodded quickly, unable to meet his eyes. Marcus continued, "And if any part of this footage disappears, even a single frame, I'll ensure federal charges are filed for evidence tampering." The officer's knees seemed to wobble. "Understood, sir." Marcus turned back to the crowd once more. "I want to thank all of you for recording what you saw today. Your phones, your voices, they're powerful. Don't ever stop using them for justice. Because when good people stay silent, injustice gets louder." Cheers erupted. Some people clapped. Others shouted, "We got your back!" And that's how you handle it. But even as the energy shifted toward celebration, Marcus's expression remained serious. He wasn't smiling. He knew this was just one battle in a much bigger war. As he and Jamal finally got into the SUV, reporters began to arrive. Microphones were thrust toward the car. "Agent Carter, is this go to court? Do you plan to press charges? What message do you have for parents watching this?" Marcus rolled down the window, halfway. "The message is simple," he said, voice steady. "Teach your kids to be respectful, but also teach them their worth. And if someone ever tries to take that away, stand firm in truth, because truth will always outshine fear." With that, the car pulled away slowly, leaving behind a scene that would soon go viral. Millions of views, endless discussions, and a lesson the whole country needed to see. Back inside the SUV, Jamal sat quietly, staring out the window. The city moved past in flashes of color and noise, but his thoughts were somewhere else. "Dad," he said softly, "I thought being innocent would protect me." Marcus glanced at him, eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. "It should, son, it should. But sometimes the world needs to be reminded of that truth. And today you reminded them." Jamal nodded, his reflection fading into the passing buildings. Outside, life continued. Cars honking, people walking, lights changing. But for everyone who had witnessed what happened, the world didn't feel quite the same, because the truth had unfolded, raw, undeniable, and public, and it was a truth no one could ignore anymore. By nightfall, the video had exploded across the internet. What had started as a small neighborhood confrontation turned into a national story within hours. Hashtags trended on every platform. Hashtag Justice for Jamal, hashtag Profiling Exposed, and hashtag Truth in Uniform filled timelines. The clip, just 2.5 minutes long, showed everything. The moment Officer Daniels grabbed Jamal, the boy's calm insistence that he paid, the crowd pleading for reason, and finally, the arrival of Marcus Carter, the calm, commanding father whose presence flipped the entire situation upside down. Within 24 hours, the video had racked up over 15 million views. News outlets ran it on loop. Headlines screamed across screens. Racist cop humiliates teen, gets owned by FBI dad. When justice wears a suit, Agent Carter confronts bias on camera. At the FBI headquarters, the story spread even faster. Agents who worked under Marcus watched the footage in disbelief, some proud, some furious that a fellow law enforcement officer had done this to one of their own. But Marcus wasn't chasing fame. He hadn't planned to go viral. He just wanted justice. Quietly, professionally, and permanently. Still, he couldn't ignore what was happening. That evening, his phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from colleague reporters and even high-ranking officials. When he finally answered one calls from Washington, the director's voice came through, calm but heavy. Marcus, I saw the footage. You handled yourself with restraint and professionalism, but I'm sure you know this story is much bigger now. Marcus sighed, glancing across the room at Jamal, who was sitting on the couch, headphones on, scrolling through his phone. I know, sir. I didn't want it to be, he said quietly. But maybe it's time the world saw what we keep talking about. You did the right thing, the director replied. But brace yourself. The media storm won't die down soon. And that officer, he's in serious trouble. Marcus ended the call, rubbing his temples. He'd spent his entire career upholding justice, but he'd never expected to become the headline. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels was living through his own nightmare. By the next morning, he couldn't even walk into precinct without feeling the eyes on him. Cold, judgmental, disappointed. His locker had been emptied, his desk cleared. The chief had already called him in for an emergency hearing. Daniels, the chief said flatly, tossing a stack of papers onto the desk. Internal Affairs wants a full review. Body cam footage, witness reports, everything. You're suspended pending investigation. Daniels stared at the floor, voice hollow. Sir, I didn't mean. Intent doesn't matter. The chief cut him off sharply. You embarrassed this department. You humiliated an innocent kid. And you brought national attention we didn't need. He leaned forward, tone lower now. And worst of all, you did it in front of an FBI agent. A respected one. Daniels swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Chief. I just reacted. The chief shook his head. That's the problem. You reacted when you should have thought. You saw color, not character. And now we all pay the price. By the time Daniels left the office, his career, once something he'd built with pride, hung by a thread. Across town, Jamal was still trying to process it all. His face was everywhere. TV, social media, blogs, even school group chats. Some messages were kind. You're brave, bro. That cop messed with the wrong kid. Your dad's a legend. But others weren't so nice. Bet your dad uses FBI power to scare him. This is why people hate cops. Another rich family playing victim. Jamal didn't know how to feel. He hadn't asked for any of this. He just wanted to go back to being a normal high school kid who liked sneakers, basketball, and hanging out with his friends. When Marcus walked into the room, Jamal looked up, eyes tired. Dad, everyone at school's talking about me. Even people I don't know. Marcus sat beside him. I know, son. It's a lot. But you did nothing wrong. Remember that. Jamal hesitated. Did we make it worse? Like, for cops who are actually good? That question hit Marcus like a punch. He'd been asking himself the same thing. He sighed. Change always feels messy at first. The truth makes people uncomfortable, even the good ones. But what we did, it'll help more than it hurts. Jamal nodded slowly, though his eyes still showed uncertainty. I hope so. By midweek, the city's mayor held a press conference. Cameras flashed, reporters buzzed, and the tension was thick. Standing beside the mayor was Marcus Carter, not as a father this time, but as a federal official. The mayor began, What happened last week was unacceptable. No child should ever be treated as a suspect based on appearance. Our city must do better. Marcus stepped forward, microphone in hand. The crowd quieted immediately. I've served this country for 20 years, he said. And in that time, I've seen bravery, sacrifice, and compassion for men and women in uniform. But I've also seen bias, the kind that doesn't wear a hood or shout slurs, but hides behind policies and assumptions. He paused, scanning the audience. The law is only as just as the people enforcing it. If we want trust between police and community, accountability isn't optional. It's required. Applause broke out, some people even standing. Daniels, watching the press conference from home, felt every word cut deep. He knew it was over. The next day, Internal Affairs confirmed what everyone already expected. He'd be terminated from the force, pending further review of his actions. He stared at his badge one last time, then set it down on the table. The same badge that once made him feel powerful now felt like a reminder of his failure. As for Jamal, life slowly began to settle again. The noise faded. The media moved on, but something inside him had changed. He wasn't just a boy in the video anymore. He was a symbol of something bigger. One day, his teacher asked him to speak at a school assembly about what happened. Nervous but determined, Jamal stood in front of his classmates and said, "I used to think justice was something only adults handled, but now I know it's something we all protect. Every time we speak up, record the truth, or refuse to stay silent." The gym erupted in applause. Marcus watched from the back, pride glimmering in his eyes. He knew the road ahead was long, but in that moment, he saw the power of one truth, one stand, to shift the world a little closer toward justice. 2 weeks had passed since that day on Maple Street, the day everything changed. For most people, the incident had already started fading from the headlines. The internet had moved on to its next viral outrage, and reporters had stopped camping outside Marcus Carter's house. But for the people at the center of it, Marcus, Jamal, and Officer Daniels, the echoes of that moment hadn't gone silent. They were still living it, replaying it, learning from it in their own painful ways. Officer Daniels sat alone in his small apartment, the walls bare except for a single-frame photo, his police academy graduation picture. He looked at it now with hollow eyes. The uniform that had once made him proud now felt like a costume he didn't deserve to wear. The suspension papers lay on the table, next to a cold cup of coffee and an unopened letter from Internal Affairs. He hadn't stepped outside much since the incident. Every time he did, he felt eyes on him, real or imagined, whispering, judging. Some people recognized him from the video. A few had shouted insults. Others just stared, shaking their heads. The humiliation burned, but what cut deeper was the guilt. He replayed that moment over and over in his head. Jamal's face when he was handcuffed, the fear in his eyes, the disbelief when Daniels ignored his words. And then the father's voice, calm, firm, powerful. Power without empathy is corruption, and a badge without humility is just a piece of metal. Those words haunted him. He'd joined the force to protect people. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing people as people, especially those who didn't look like him. And now, that realization was eating him alive. One morning, as the sunlight filtered through the blinds, Daniels finally opened the letter from Internal Affairs. It wasn't just a notice of termination. It was also an invitation. Officer Daniels, you have been terminated from active duty effective immediately. However, as part of our Department of Reform initiative, you are offered the opportunity to attend a mandatory educational rehabilitation program addressing bias, de-escalation, and community engagement. Completion does not guarantee reinstatement, but it will be considered in future evaluations. He stared at the paper, conflicted. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door, a small, narrow door that led somewhere different. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Maybe I need this." Across the city, the Carter family sat at the dinner table. For the first time in weeks, there was laughter, real laughter. Jamal was telling his mom about how his teachers kept calling him the future lawyer, and how one of his friends had started calling him Agent Junior. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "You sure you're okay with all this attention, son?" he asked. Jamal shrugged. "It's weird, yeah. But if it helps people think before they judge someone like me, maybe it's worth it." Marcus smiled proudly. His son was growing faster than he expected, not just in age, but in strength. After dinner, when Jamal went to his room, Marcus stepped outside onto the porch. The evening air was cool, quiet. He looked up at the stars and thought about everything that had happened. Justice had been served, at least on paper. But something in him still felt unsettled, because real justice wasn't about revenge or career endings. It was about change. And Marcus wasn't sure if that change had truly begun. 3 days later, there was a knock at Marcus's door. When he opened it, he froze for a second. Standing there, dressed in plain clothes and holding his cap nervously, was Officer Daniels. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "You got some nerve showing up here." Daniels nodded slowly. "I know, and you don't owe me a word, but I needed to say this face to face." Marcus said nothing, arms crossed. Daniels swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I know I already said it that day, but it didn't feel enough. I've spent every day since in thinking about what I did, how blind I was. I hurt your son, and I disrespected everything this badge is supposed to stand for." He took a shaky breath. "I got fired. They offered me a chance to take a rehabilitation course. I'm taking it. I needed you to know I'm trying to change. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to hear that from me." Marcus studied him quietly. For a long time, neither man spoke. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the faint hum of the city in the distance. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You made a serious mistake, Daniels. You humiliated my son and almost scarred him for life. But the fact that you came here, not to save your job, not for the cameras, but to own up to it, that means something." Daniels nodded, eyes moist. "I'm not that proud cop anymore, Agent Carter. I just want to learn to be a better man." Marcus stepped closer, his tone softer now. "Then start by listening more and judging less. Redemption isn't something you earn overnight. It's something you prove every single day." Daniels nodded again. "I will. Thank you for even opening the door." As he turned to leave, Marcus called out, "Daniels!" The former officer stopped and turned around. "If you ever finish that program, and mean it, come talk to me again. Maybe there's a way to use your story to teach others." For the first time in weeks, Daniels allowed himself a small, grateful smile. "I like that." That night, Marcus sat with Jamal and told him about the visit. Jamal's eyebrows shot up. "He came here?" "Seriously." Marcus nodded. "He did, and he's taking responsibility." Jamal thought for a long moment before saying quietly, "You think people like him can really change?" Marcus looked at his son, choosing his words carefully. "People can change, son, but not all of them want to. What matters is when someone does, when they truly see the harm they cause and decide to do better." Jamal nodded slowly. "So, are you going to forgive him?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't about letting him off the hook. It's about freeing ourselves from the weight of hate. We don't forget what happened, but we move forward, stronger, wiser." Jamal leaned back, processing his father's words. "I think I get it," he said finally. "It's not about erasing the past. It's about learning from it." Marcus smiled proudly. "Exactly." As the night deepened, Marcus stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. He thought of Daniels, of Jamal, of every kid who'd ever been wrongly accused. Maybe the world was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing nonetheless. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come from courtrooms or punishments. Sometimes it starts with an apology on a doorstep and the courage to face the truth. The morning sun broke through a hazy sky, casting golden streaks across the city skyline. The buzz of traffic mixed with the faint hum of television news anchors as screens across the country replayed the same headline. Officer Daniels issues public apology after wrongful arrest of FBI agent son. It had only been 3 days since Marcus Carter confronted him in front of the world, but the video had exploded online, spreading across every major platform. TikTok, YouTube, X, Instagram, you name it. The clip of Marcus unhandcuffing his son while calmly dismantling the officer's bias had become a symbol, not just of power, but of dignity under fire. By the time Daniels woke up that morning, his name was trending for all the wrong reasons. He stared blankly at his phone, the headline glowing on the screen. His inbox was flooded, messages from the department, reporters, and even old academy friends who now didn't know what to say. Some supported him quietly, saying, asterisk, you're not a bad guy, you just made a mistake. Asterisk, others weren't so kind. Asterisk, you're the face of what's wrong with the system. Asterisk, he knew he couldn't run from it. Not anymore. The police department had arranged a press conference that morning, insisting he read an official statement prepared by their legal team. It was the department's attempt at damage control, a way to show the world they took responsibility. But Daniels knew this wasn't just about the department's image. This was about facing what he'd done. He put on his uniform, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The badge gleamed, but for the first time in his career, it didn't feel like a symbol of pride. It felt heavy, like a reminder of everything he'd failed to live up to. At 9 a.m. sharp, Daniels stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed. Dozens of reporters filled the small conference room. Behind him stood the police chief, arms crossed, wearing a neutral expression that screamed politics. Daniels adjusted the microphone, his palms sweating. He cleared his throat, the silence pressing down on him. I want to start by saying, I was wrong. A few gasps rippled through the room. He paused, breathing slowly. On the afternoon of March 4th, I accused a young man, Jamal Carter, of theft, without cause, without evidence, and without listening. I failed to uphold the principles I swore to protect. He looked down at the paper in front of him. The words written by the department were formal, sanitized, but his heart was burning with something rawer. He folded the paper and spoke from memory instead. What I did wasn't just a mistake. It was bias. It was the kind of judgment that comes from fear and ignorance, and it hurt someone who didn't deserve it. The room fell still. Even the clicking cameras slowed. I looked at that boy, and instead of seeing a kid who worked hard to buy something he loved, I saw a stereotype. That's on me. No one told me to think that way. I let myself believe it, and now I have to live with it. He swallowed hard. I've been suspended, and I don't know if I'll ever wear this uniform again. But if I do, I'll make sure it's as a better man, one who listens, one who learns, and one who never lets his own prejudice guide his actions. He took a shaky breath and looked directly into the cameras. To Jamal Carter and his father, Assistant Director Marcus Carter, I'm sorry. I can't undo what I did, but I can promise to change. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then a few flashes popped as reporters began shouting questions. Officer Daniels, were you forced to make this statement? Do you think racial bias is widespread in your department? Has the FBI contacted you since the incident? He didn't answer. He just nodded respectfully, turned off the mic, and walked off stage. His heart was pounding, but strangely it felt lighter. Outside the conference room, Marcus and Jamal were watching the live broadcast from home. Jamal sat on the couch, arms crossed, a mixture of anger and confusion on his face. He really said sorry on camera, he muttered. You think he meant it? Marcus leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, studying the screen. I think, he said slowly, that's a man trying to find his way out of the darkness. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Jamal frowned. But, Dad, he still humiliated me. Everyone saw that. I can't forget it. Marcus nodded. And you shouldn't. But forgiveness isn't forgetting, son. It's recognizing when someone's trying to do better. The apology spread fast. Within hours, clips of Daniel's trembling voice were circulating online. Some calling it redemption, others calling it damage control. But regardless of the motive, something bigger had started. Activist groups reached out to Marcus, asking him to speak about the importance of police reform. News outlets called Jamal's story Asterisk, a turning point in the conversation about race and policing. Asterisk, the police department announced new anti-bias training programs and promised to work with federal advisors, including, to everyone's surprise, Marcus Carter himself. When the press asked Marcus if he'd agreed to consult for the program, he said one simple thing: I don't want to destroy the system. I want to fix it from the inside out. A week later, the first session of the new training program began. 100 officers sat in a large auditorium as Marcus took the stage. Standing beside him, quietly, humbly, was Daniels. Marcus spoke with calm authority. Today isn't about blame. It's about responsibility. Every one of you wears a badge that says you serve and protect. But who you serve and how you protect, that defines you. Daniels stepped up to the mic next. His voice cracked slightly. I used to think being a cop meant showing power. But I learned the hard way that real strength comes from restraint. From seeing people, really seeing them before judging them. The room was silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. For the first time, officers listened, really listened. After the session, Daniels approached Marcus privately. I don't know if I'll ever make it right, he said quietly. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, then said, You just did. Later that evening, Marcus and Jamal walked along the same street where the incident had happened. The store lights glowed softly. Jamal stopped for a moment, staring at the spot where he'd been handcuffed. Feels different now, he said. Marcus nodded. Because you changed what it meant. You turned pain into power. Jamal smiled faintly. Guess that's what you always taught me. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pride in his eyes. And you proved I was right. That night, as the city lights flickered against the skyline, the world felt a little bit heavier, but also, somehow, a little more hopeful. Because sometimes change doesn't come from a courtroom or a protest. Sometimes it begins with a single apology, spoken from the heart, broadcast to millions, and heard by those brave enough to believe that people can still change. That night, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after weeks of chaos. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the trees, brushing against the window of Jamal's room. Inside, the faint hum of the television downstairs echoed. Marcus had left it on, though he wasn't really watching. The world had finally stopped spinning so fast, and now it was just still. Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone. News clips of the apology, articles about the Carter case, and even memes filled his feed. Some people called him a hero. Others argued in the comments, debating whether justice had really been served. But Jamal didn't feel like a hero. He just felt tired. He put his phone face down on the desk and looked at a small picture frame beside his lamp. A photo of him, his dad, and his mom at his last birthday. He was smiling wide then, without any cameras or headlines. Just a normal kid. When Marcus knocked on the door and stepped in, Jamal barely looked up. You still awake, son? Jamal nodded. Yeah, just thinking. Marcus sat down beside him on the bed. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. Thinking about what happened? Marcus finally asked. Jamal hesitated, then nodded again. Yeah, about everything. I keep replaying that day in my head. The sirens, him yelling. People staring at me like I did something wrong. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't even do anything, Dad. I just wanted to buy headphones. Marcus looked down, his jaw tightening. I know, son, and you shouldn't have had to go through that. Jamal clenched his fists. Why do people like him always see us as suspects first? Why do they look at me and think I must be up to something bad? Marcus sighed deeply. Because fear is powerful, Jamal, and ignorance feeds it. Some people grow up being taught to see difference as danger, and when that's left unchecked, it turns into something ugly, something we saw firsthand. Jamal looked at him, eyes filled with frustration. But you're an FBI agent. You've been protecting this country your whole life. You've saved people who didn't even respect you. Doesn't that prove we belong? Marcus smiled sadly. Son, we've always belonged. But belonging doesn't stop ignorance. Respect isn't something you're given. It's something you demand through how you carry yourself. You showed that when you stood tall that day, even when they treated you like a criminal. Jamal looked away. I didn't feel strong, though. I was scared. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about standing up even when you are. For a long while, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Jamal asked softly, "Do you think Officer Daniels meant it?" His apology. Marcus leaned back slightly, considering his words. "Yes, I do." Jamal frowned. "After what he did?" Marcus nodded. "He made a terrible choice, one that came from prejudice. But I saw something in his eyes when he stood there. Shame, regret. That kind of pain doesn't come from someone who's just sorry they got caught. It comes from someone who finally realizes what they've done." Jamal sighed. "I want to forgive him, but I don't know how." Marcus smiled gently. "You don't have to yet. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a process. It takes time." He looked at his son seriously. "But don't let his mistake turn into your bitterness. Hate is heavy, Jamal. It'll slow you down, block your blessings. And you got too much greatness ahead of you to carry that." Jamal looked at his father, searching his face. "Is that what you did all these years? Working in a system that didn't always respect you?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Oh, I had my moments. Times I wanted to walk away. Times I wanted to shout. But then I'd remember why I started, not to fight against the system, but to change it from within." He paused, his voice lower now. "Every time someone like me earns a position of power, every time a young black man like you stands up for himself with dignity, the world shifts, even if just a little. That's how we win." Jamal smiled faintly. "You really think I can change the world?" Marcus's expression softened. "You already have, son. You didn't see it, but that video, the one they keep showing, it opened eyes. People are talking about what's right, not just what's wrong. You reminded them what real injustice looks like. That's bigger than you know." Jamal looked down at his hands. "I didn't want to be famous for this." "I know," Marcus said, nodding. "But sometimes we don't choose our moments. They choose us." Jamal thought about that for a long while. The anger in his chest slowly began to fade, replaced by something quieter. Not peace, but understanding. He looked up at his dad again. "You think he'll really change?" Marcus smiled faintly. "If he's smart, he will. Because once a man sees truth that clearly, he can't unsee it." Jamal leaned back against his bed frame, exhaling deeply. "You always know what to say." Marcus laughed softly. "That's part of being a dad. You'll understand one day." They both chuckled quietly, and for a moment, the heaviness in the air lifted. Marcus stood up, patting Jamal on the shoulder. "Get some sleep, son. Tomorrow's a new day. And you got school. Can't be saving the world on an empty stomach." Jamal smiled. "Night, Dad." Marcus walked to the door, then paused. "Oh, and Jamal?" "Yeah. I'm proud of you. Not because of what happened, but because of how you handled it. You kept your head up when the world tried to bring you down. That's strength, son, real strength." Jamal felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thanks, Dad." Marcus nodded and quietly closed the door. Jamal lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the past few weeks played like a movie in his mind. The flashing lights, the handcuffs, his father's calm voice cutting through the chaos. But for the first time, those memories didn't just sting. They reminded him of something powerful, that he wasn't defined by what had been done to him, but by how he chose to respond. Downstairs, Marcus sat alone on the couch, the TV still flickering. The reporter on screen was discussing new reforms in the police department, quoting his name as one of the consultants. He muted the volume and leaned back, his mind wandering. He thought of Daniels, the apology, the conversation at the door, the look in his eyes. Maybe, just maybe, change was possible after all. Not overnight, not easily, but possible. He whispered softly to himself, "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about awakening." As the night deepened, Jamal finally drifted off to sleep upstairs, the faint moonlight spilling across his face. Marcus glanced up the stairs one last time before turning off the TV. The house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of fear or exhaustion. It was a silence that follows a storm, calm, reflective, full of new beginnings. And in that silence, father and son both found something they hadn't felt in weeks. Peace, fragile, real, and earned. Weeks turned into months, and the storm that had once consumed the Carter family slowly faded from the public spotlight. The story that had once dominated headlines, racist cop accuses FBI agent son of theft, became a case study in schools, a topic in community meetings, and a spark for conversations that people had avoided for far too long. But for Jamal, the memories were still vivid. The glare of flashing police lights, the cold touch of handcuffs, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal for no reason. Even as the world moved on, those few minutes still echoed inside him. Yet, something had changed. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was aware, stronger. One bright Saturday morning, Jamal stood outside the same electronics store where everything had begun. The street looked the same. Cars passing by, people carrying shopping bags, laughter drifting from the nearby cafe. Yet it all felt different now. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The chime of the door triggered an instant memory of that day. The way the officer had stormed in, the way everyone had stared. But this time there was no fear. The store manager, Mr. Patel, recognized him immediately. His face lit up with surprise. "Jamal, my boy, I didn't expect to see you here again." Jamal smiled shyly. "Yeah, it's been a while. Just thought I'd drop by." Mr. Patel's expression softened. "You've grown taller. And stronger, I think." He hesitated before adding, after that day, we had so many people come here, reporters, activists, even police officers asking questions. It changed everything, not just for you, but for this whole block." Jamal tilted his head. "Changed how?" Mr. Patel smiled. People started talking about how they treat others, about assumptions. The shop owners formed a diversity committee. First one in this district. And guess what? Crime's actually gone down. Maybe people finally started seeing each other as humans again. Jamal chuckled softly. "That's good to hear." He glanced toward the back of the store, where a new security poster hung on the wall. It read, "Respect before judgment. Everyone deserves to be seen." He smiled at that. "That's new." Mr. Patel nodded proudly. "Inspired by you." For a moment, Jamal didn't know what to say. He just stood there, feeling something he hadn't felt since that day. Peace. Outside, a group of middle school students walked by, whispering excitedly when they noticed him. One of them waved shyly. "Hey, aren't you that kid from the video? The one who stood up to that cop?" Jamal hesitated, then smiled and nodded. "Yeah, that's me." The kids grinned, their eyes filled with admiration. "You're awesome, man. You made a difference." Jamal laughed awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. "Thanks. Just don't get yourself into that kind of situation, all right?" The kids nodded and ran off, still talking about him as they disappeared down the block. Jamal watched them go, realized for the first time that his pain had become someone else's inspiration. Later that afternoon, he and his father met at a community center downtown. The police department had organized a new outreach program, one focused on rebuilding trust between officers and youth. Marcus had been invited to speak, and Jamal was there to support him. The center buzzed with quiet anticipation. Dozens of people filled the seats, police officers in uniform, parents, teenagers, and community leaders. On one side of the stage stood a banner that read, "Rebuilding Bridges, Unity Through Understanding." When Marcus took the stage, the crowd went silent. His presence commanded attention, calm, confident, steady. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. "We're here today because of a mistake. A painful, public mistake that forced us to see something ugly and do something about it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "My son was wrongfully accused because of the color of his skin. But today, we're not here to relive that moment. We're here to talk about what came after it, about accountability, growth, and change." He gestured toward Jamal, who was sitting in the front row. "Because out of that moment of pain came strength, not just from me, but from a 15-year-old boy who stood tall when the world tried to shrink him." The audience turned toward Jamal, clapping softly. He felt his cheeks flush, but smiled anyway. Then Marcus surprised everyone by saying, "And today, I'd like to invite someone else to speak, a man who once made a terrible decision, but chose to face it instead of running from it. Officer Daniels. A quiet murmur spread across the room as Daniels stepped onto the stage. He looked nervous but resolute, dressed in a simple blue shirt, no uniform, no badge, just a man. He stood at the microphone for a moment before speaking. "I don't expect applause," he said softly, "or forgiveness, but I do want to tell the truth." He took a deep breath. "That day, I didn't see Jamal as a person. I saw him as a threat, and that's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. I was wrong, not just about him, but about what it means to serve." The audience listened quietly, eyes fixed on him. I went through bias training. I listened to people's stories. And for the first time, I saw what I've been blind to all along. We wear badges to protect, not to profile. And now, I spend my days speaking to other officers, telling them what happens when you let fear and prejudice take over judgment. He turned to Jamal. "I want to thank you. You didn't just stand up for yourself that day. You stood up for what's right. You made me a better man, even when I didn't deserve it." The room erupted into applause. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was steady, emotional, healing. Jamal rose from his seat, walked up to Daniels, and extended his hand. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. Then Daniels took his hand. The handshake wasn't just symbolic. It was transformative. A simple, human gesture that said, "We can start again." After the event, reporters surrounded Marcus and Jamal, asking if they thought the world was truly changing. Marcus smiled calmly. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said. "But every conversation, every apology, every act of courage, it builds something new." That evening, as the sun set over the city, Marcus and Jamal drove home in silence. The streets were glowing with warm light, and for once, the world didn't feel divided. Jamal looked out the window, watching the sky fade from orange to deep blue. "You think we really made a difference, Dad?" Marcus glanced at him, a proud smile on his face. "Son, difference isn't about how loud the world claps for you. It's about how many hearts you touch quietly." Jamal nodded, gazing back at the skyline. The same city that had once made him feel small, now filled with endless possibility. That night, before bed, he opened his journal and wrote just one line. "They tried to break me, but instead, they made me stronger." And as the moonlight washed across his room, Jamal realized something profound. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about awakening, understanding, and forgiveness. Because that day, a racist cop thought he was just another black kid on the street. But what he didn't know was that the boy he tried to break would grow into a symbol of change, living proof that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, light finds a way through.